Hey, welcome back, you guys. This is LaughNapkin, and today I'll be reading 3 stories from r/MaliciousCompliance. I want to give a big shout out to all the new subscribers here, and if this is your first time seeing one of my videos, feel free to subscribe for dailies. Now let's get into it. Sure, I'll count every part for you. I work for an inventory company. We literally go to businesses, count their inventory, update their computer systems, and then my boss compiles a bunch of statistics about their inventory to discuss with management about how they're doing. Some of my boss's biggest business comes from buy-sells, or an inventory that is being done before the sale of a business in order to calculate the value of the current inventory, and therefore how much a buyer has to pay the seller for it. This can be complicated, because what counts as a good piece of inventory changes depending on the agreement the two companies reach. We're usually brought in as a neutral third party. My boss has been doing this stuff for 40 years, and has way too many stories of sellers trying to get him to inflate their inventory, or buyers trying to get him to devalue it. So a few years ago, a client, who will henceforth be known as buyer, contacts my boss about doing an inventory for a business he wants to buy. My boss had worked for many years with buyer's father, who had recently retired and passed on the business to buyer. My boss doesn't think very highly of buyer, but he's not going to turn away business just because he thinks someone is an entitled idiot. My boss informs buyer that he will need to see the sales agreement at least 1 week before the inventory so he can review it. He's not a lawyer, but he has enough experience with these things that he can parse through the language on his own. And if there's something weird, the week gives him enough time to get an actual lawyer to look over the agreement or speak to the buyer or seller to go over things. Buyer agrees to send it as soon as the lawyers finish fleshing it out. He doesn't. For the next 3 months, my boss is all but begging buyer to send him the sales agreement. Buyer apparently has the attention span of a 3-year-old learning trigonometry, because he agrees every time and then a thing came up and he forgot. Boss was even desperate enough to try to contact the seller and try to get the details, but the seller refused to even take the calls. The day before the inventory, my boss finally calls buyer and says that if he doesn't have the agreement before 10 p.m. that night, he was going to cancel the inventory. Buyer finally faxes the agreement over so my boss can get a handle on what exactly the buyer has agreed to buy from the seller. So by the time the date of the inventory arrives, my boss is starting out the day severely annoyed because he had been up all night going over the sales agreement. Side note, because my boss is a super wonderful human, he often meets a group of us so we can carpool to the jobs together, which meant I had a front row seat to the horror that was my boss's welcome by buyer the day of the inventory. Buyer: "Hey boss, thanks for coming out today, I really appreciate it." Boss: "Well, it's what you're paying me for. Hey, before we get started with anything, I want to talk to you and the seller about the sales agreement. I just want to make sure everyone is on the same page before we get started." Buyer: "Oh, no need. We've got it all figured out." Boss: "I'm sorry?" Buyer: "The seller is really hurting financially, and he has to take care of his sick father and his family, so I'm just gonna buy the whole inventory." Boss: "You're just gonna buy everything?" Buyer: "Yeah, that should make this simpler for you, right? You can just do the inventory like normal." Boss: "Okay, you realize that you don't need to do that, right? Your agreement states that you only have to pay him for inventory that is below a certain age and in good condition." Buyer: "It's not a big deal if there's a few bad pieces here and there. It'll be a lot faster if you guys just count everything." Boss: "I need to make sure you understand. Just from the casual look around I've had so far, I can tell you that a good portion of what I'm seeing is outdated and in some cases completely destroyed. You won't be able to sell them." Buyer: "Well, I've taken a good look around too, and I think you're exaggerating. Besides, whatever I can't sell here, I can always post up on eBay. There's always somebody looking for this old stuff, so I want you to count everything." Boss: "I understand that, and if you tell me you want me to count everything, that's what we'll do. But I really think that..." Buyer: "Look, I'm still gonna pay you the same, so what the hell do you care what I buy? You may know inventory, but you can't see the big picture here. I want everything counted and added to the inventory. It's not like you guys have to work any harder. Boss: okay, then we're gonna need to reword our contract. The current one specifies that we're doing the inventory according to the sales agreement you've reached. If you want us to count everything, then I just need... Buyer: I just said I wanted everything counted. I'm not paying a lawyer to change one line on a contract. Why are you making such a big deal out of something like this? Just count the stuff. Now, as previously stated, my boss had been doing this job for over 40 years, and he's already walked in pretty annoyed by Buyer. Buyer has now been dicking around with the sales agreement for months, forcing my boss to do a week's worth of planning in one night, and now, not only did he want to completely ignore all the work my boss had put in, but Buyer also did it with a ridiculous amount of snark and attitude, while my boss was just trying to make sure Buyer didn't end up paying for junk. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. My boss gives Buyer his giant customer service smile, which has always scarily reminded me of the Grinch, and says, "Alright then, you want us to count everything? We'll count everything." And then he came back to our crew and announced, "Everybody choose a section, we're counting everything." Broken piece? Counted. A piece with a handwritten or ripped up part number? Counted. A kit with pieces missing? Counted. Pieces so old that they have become obsolete? Counted. We counted each and every piece in the business, no matter what the condition of the part. A couple of months later, one of the crew asked my boss about what happened, and he burst out laughing. The Buyer finally figured out, after about a month of nonsense and hearing his employees gripe, that about 30% of the inventory he'd bought was simply garbage, for a total of approximately $500,000. My boss lost him as a client, and he regrets absolutely nothing. You want me to answer every call? Sure thing. Enjoy your wait. Background. Part of my job involves taking calls from the public to offer various types of support. This can range from tech support to helping people find services in our country that they need. My team is me and one other person. Between us, we have to cover 7:30 to 19:30, Monday through Friday, and weekends as well. Because of this and the fact that the company won't invest in call waiting for us, we can only take one call at a time. Our voicemail quite clearly states that we're a small team, but if you leave your name and number, we aim to get back to you within 5 minutes. Normally, people are rather understanding of our situation and are happy to wait for us to call them back. But as the world is full of impatient a-holes, we often get voicemails just criticizing us. Now, this happened today, and I've been wanting to react this way for a long time and finally got the opportunity to. Cast. Me, Jerk. Jerk. This is bloody ridiculous. I was told to call this number, but what's the point in telling people to call if there's nobody answer the phone? Jerk calls again. Me. Hello, you're through to company name, Crackbear speaking, how can I help you? Jerk. Oh, so now you answer the phone? What's the point of having a number if you never bloody answer? Me. Did you leave us a voicemail? I've just listened to it, but unfortunately you didn't leave any contact details, so I was unable to return your call. Thank you for calling back. How can I help? Jerk. You should answer every call that comes through. Me. Well, unfortunately there are only 2 people on my team, including myself, and there tends to be only one of us in at a time, so if I answered every call, I'd end up having to keep putting people on hold, and that really doesn't seem fair. Regardless though, you're through at the moment and I'm happy to help you however I can. Jerk. You can help me by doing your job and answering the phone when it rings. At this point, I'm like, F you, lady. So, sod it, I'll comply. Me. Okay, sure. I'm sorry that I've annoyed you. I'll make sure to answer the phone whenever it rings. Now, how can I help you? Jerk starts to describe her problem. Phone rings. Me. Oh, I'm sorry, the phone is ringing. I'll have to place you on hold. I then help the person calling, taking my sweet, sweet time. Like going above and beyond, just to keep this other lady waiting. Plus, it's nice to help people. Take jerk off hold. Me. Thank you for your patience. Now you were saying? Jerk. How dare you put me on hold, especially... Me. Oh, I'm sorry, the phone is ringing. I'll have to place you on hold. Hold. You can see where this is going. I think I managed to keep this going for about 15 to 20 minutes before she hung up, and I'm in for the next 10 hours. God, I hope she calls back. You start at 7, you finish at 7. I used to work at a car company about 2 to 3 years ago as a telephonist on the night shift doing 12-hour shifts. It was pretty good. 4 days working, 3 days off, and the pay was decent. However, most people didn't take their job seriously. They would call in sick or just not show up for work at all, and especially on nights when there were only four of us, if one person didn't show up, you felt it. I was a star employee. I showed up early, logged in, and started working usually from 6:30. I never took a sick day, changed my holidays to fit the company's needs, and worked any overtime they needed me to work. I was so dedicated to my role that I had worked on multiple occasions 18 to 24 hours as people wouldn't show up for shifts and they needed cover. It was my first real job, and I believed in the company. I used the train system to get to and from work, and always planned out my routes around as much as I could to avoid being late. However, on this particular day, they were running a reduced service due to breakdowns. A lot of the trains had been repaired using less than stellar parts, and the wheels kept sticking to the track when they hit the brakes, causing wear on the wheels in specific spots. So a lot of trains were out of commission. On top of that, the train I was on had been stopped due to a signal issue for 15 to 20 minutes. This led me to being late. I had shown up about 10 minutes late to the start of my shift. Before I had even sat down, my manager was giving me grief. Apparently they were mad because I had stopped other telephonists from going home, as someone had to work 10 extra minutes to cover my shift as 2 people were ill and couldn't make it in. Now I hate being late. I was already pissed off that I was late, but my manager giving me trouble as soon as I walked through the door just irritated me even more. My reply to him was as follows. Apologies I was late, however, how many times have I ever been late? I show up 30 minutes before my shift every day. I've stayed late to cover days before. The train had an issue and it was out of my control. I was stuck underground with no signal to call or text to let you know. My manager didn't give a crap. Their reply to me was, you start at 7, you finish at 7. You're in early on your own time. Those times you have stayed behind, you have been paid and no one asked you to. Okay then, was my reply. The next day was extremely busy. My colleague had left, and only one of the morning guys had showed up for his shift to take over. As he sat down, I began to pack up. At 7 a.m. on the dot, I left. As I usually helped out when this happened, everyone was surprised and had asked me where I was going. My only reply was, I start at 7, I finish at 7. This was my final shift, and so I was off for the next couple of days. On my first shift back, I get pulled into the office by the manager with HR. They asked me why I left a single telephonist on their own. I looked at my manager and repeated the exact same words that were said to me. My manager informed me that I start at 7, I finish at 7. The look on HR's face was priceless. She was pissed. She already had a staff issue to deal with, and on top of that, one of her most helpful staff members had been mugged off by a manager. She told me to go back to my desk, and she needed to speak to the manager in question. 20 minutes later, the manager came back in looking absolutely defeated. He never, ever said anything to me again about being late. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really enjoyed making it. Don't forget to join my Discord if you want to submit your own story or just be part of the LaughNapkin community. And please, consider subscribing as it helps me out big time.